Hey gang. Alright, so 71 Mustang, we're going to be doing suspension on it because it's completely shot. So at the front wheel, we've got just about 24 inches to the fender well. And on the rear, we've got, well, let's call it 25 and a quarter. And of course we got these tires with these stupid little sidewalls on it. So we have a whole new suspension, front and rear, all new steering components. I'm going to show you how those go together. And of course we got all these other parts that got to go on. And because he's nostalgic, yes, we're putting on the old Lakewood Universal traction bars to try to harness this fire-breathing 429. Yeah, okay. No, seat cover, seat foam, radio, door panels, seat cover, oh yeah, I said seat covers, electronic gauges, front spoiler, rear spoiler, center console, clock for the center console. I'm sure there's a bunch of other stuff that I'm missing. Oh, new bumpers front and rear too, because these aren't in bad shape, but he wants better bumpers on it. So, like I said, I'm going to get the rear suspension taken apart, show you how easy that is to go together, and then I'll show you all the little nuances of doing a Mustang front suspension. That's fun. Alright, so we're starting on the rear suspension, and at this point, that leaf spring has already been changed. This one is out. And like I said, the remnants of an old trailer hitch was left in the car, right here. So we got a bolt here, and then we got two through bolts up top. So we'll get those out. Then we'll dig out these old bushings here, replace them with urethane, put in new shackles, and put the new spring back in. This is actually pretty straightforward. It's just up front you got one through bolt that goes through the front eye. You got the two U-bolts that go over the rear axle, and then your shackle in the back here. So it's just nuts and bolts. Okay, so this is a difference between the stock 1971 46-year-old spring and the new one behind it. You can see it's just a little different. It's not all played out. It doesn't come with bushings installed, so we got urethane bushings to go in there. And the other thing is, right there is a little tiny 5/8 inch rear sway bar. Funny enough, we cannot find bushings for it, or even the end links. So I ordered a whole new kit. It's going to be a 7/8, so this thing should handle just a bit better. And now we're going to get back to it. Now these kits come with a special grease for the urethane bushings. Use it, otherwise you're going to end up with squeaks. And it also makes it all go together a little bit easier. So basically, you're going to apply your grease. Well, obviously this one's empty, but you're going to apply your grease around here, drive that bushing into there, take your other two bushings that go up into the body, and get them through that big hole there. Then you have these metal collars, grease them, and it comes with all new nuts and bolts. And the easiest way to do this is to put the front eye in first, swing the shackle around so that the rear spring can bolt onto it, then do your spring plate. Makes it go so much easier. Should take you about 10 minutes. Nice and easy. Now generally these will push in by hand, but if you're going to use something to tap it in, get yourself a rubber mallet, because you haven't lived until you've peened over one of these edges and you're up underneath the car and you're trying to get this bolt to go in and it won't go in. Other thing to pay attention to is that for the front eye, it's a different size. So we have this collar here, and this bolt will not go into it. Found that out the hard way. Alright, so you just drive this guy down. Alright, now that's ready to install in the car. Like I said, same thing. Grease these guys up, put them in the car, And I'll show you what goes on with that. Now, once you get the bushings up in the car, they're not going to go in nice and easy. So you got a couple of choices. You can take a hammer, tap them in from the sides, they'll go. What I suggest doing is putting this one in first, all the way. Then put your metal collar in. Then put this bushing on. It'll make life a whole lot easier for you. Now you could use a hammer, you could use a big C-clamp, you could use a big pair of channel locks to squeeze everything together. Doesn't matter how you get there, as long as you get there. Okay, so you can see this bushing's in. We have the metal collar in. We have our other new bushing all greased up, ready to go. If you don't have that grease, or regular synthetic wheel bearing grease will work too. Basically, you just don't want metal on urethane. It makes a whole lot of noise. That sucker is going to go in there. Let's see if I could do this with one hand. I doubt it. I'm going to need two hands. You get the idea of what I'm doing here, right, guys? Okay. Now, once you get to this point, everything's close enough. You can actually go ahead and put your bolt through with the shackle hanging down, and then use the nut and bolt to run it the rest of the way in. Don't tighten anything up until the spring is on, the wheel is on the car, and the car is under its own weight. Very important. Okay, so now the bushings are drawn in all the way. You want to leave your shackles nice and loose here. And now it's time to put the spring in. Seriously? Traction bars? It's 2018. Who the hell is still using traction bars? This guy! Yay. Alright, let's get them installed. Alright, now that the front suspension, or the rear suspension is done, it's time to move on to the front suspension. Now, there are a ton of videos out there on how to take out these coil springs. So, I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail here. Google is your friend in this case. I'm trying to get my lights set up. Alright, this ain't going to happen. Alright. That took forever. Alright, so basically pretty simple concept. You're going to have some attaching hardware. You got a stud, a couple nuts and bolts, same thing on the other side. Take all those out. This whole upper housing is going to come out. Once you do that, spring compressor goes inside here. Jack up the suspension, attach the spring compressor, take it out. I'll try to walk you through it. Alright, so front suspension teardown is a little different than the back. If your car has these shock tower braces here, they're going to have to be removed. So you got 3 9/16 nuts right up here. And in the back, you got two 9/16 bolts with 9/16 head nuts on the bottom. Once you get those out of the way, this will come off. Now, the other thing that you want to do is you actually want to jack the suspension up on the car a little bit to take pressure off this top nut for the shock. Alright, so you get that off, you got these 3 off, get those 2 off, and I'll show you what goes on under the car. Alright, so the other part of the reason why you want to take the load off the shock is you have a nut here, and then there's a nut all the way around back. But to get there, you have to reach up through here, okay, right where my finger is. Well, with the control arm in the down position like this, you can't get your socket up there with your extension. So you sort of need to level out the control arm the way it is now. So you take off that nut, the one in the back, they're both 1/2 inch, and then you can pull the shock right out through the top. So with the shock tower cap and the strut support out of the way, just take this, pull it right out. Let's see how bad this is. These 2 fingers. Yep, that's dead. Okay, so if you have the same kind of luck that I do, what you're going to find is you actually have to take the claws off the actual stud for the coil spring compressor, insert those like so, then drop the stud through, start the threads down here, start running the sucker up. Now, little tip for you, save you some cranking on the spring, is before you start compressing the spring, jack up the suspension on the car. Alright, so that you're already starting to compress the coil, and that'll save you some time as far as compressing the coil. Once you get it compressed enough, then you can drop the suspension back down, and then the spring should come right out. So let me get that set up, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so we got the stud ran through, we got it threaded in down here on the bottom. I got a electric impact up top. Now what will happen is as you start tightening this up, you want to make, keep an eye on what these little claws are doing. You can see that one just moved. Okay, now, very, very important. Listen to me. See these little teeth here, these little claws? Make sure they are fully engaged around the coil spring itself. See this guy up here is getting a little left up. So if you have to, it may take you 3 or 4 times, but you do not want to start compressing this unless these are locked in. Because with this thing compressed, it's under all that pressure. And if it gets loose, it will find a way to go through your chest. And that will be a horrible way to die. I don't want to see that happen to you. So use extreme caution when doing this, please. Okay, so now you can see the bottom of the spring is off the spring seat. What you basically have here is a loaded gun. So what you want to do is get this thing out of here as soon as possible. Now, like I said, I was going to jack the suspension up, and I did. So now, when I let this down, you see I'm standing out of the way here. Slowly, dummy, slowly. Okay. So that little pop was it coming out of the top seat. I'm going to need 2 hands for this, but at this point now, I'm going to go ahead and take the spring out. While I got everything out on the floor here, let me show you my setup. Okay, now depending on whether or not you buy or rent a coil spring compressor, now I went and rented one without realizing I had one in my drawer. So the setup that I use, this is the threaded part. This is the part that this slides through. Okay. Now, on Mustangs, I don't know about other cars, on Mustangs, this stud is going to be too long because what's going to happen is you're going to bottom out on the bottom of the on the top of the coil spring seat. Okay, so what I did is I got a nipple, 3.5 inch, 4 inch, just a regular pipe nipple, big washer on one end. This end rides against here. All right, to take up that slack. Otherwise, you'll never get this out. It just ain't gonna happen. And same setup when you put it back in. And now I didn't show you it actually coming out because it's pretty uneventful. You compress the spring, you lower the suspension, and the spring literally will fall out. You can use, depending on the kind of electric impact you have, I have an Ingersoll Rand 20 volt. It works good for most things, but it just doesn't have enough beans to compress this, so I had to break out the air gun here, and that got it done. Once I'm ready, we'll get into how everything else gets replaced. While you got this apart, this is a good time to inspect. So you have this coil spring isolator here, right? I think this is actually the top one. Yeah, it's the top one. And it's kind of in pieces, and the bottom one, that's in pieces too. So now is the time to get everything you need. We already went ahead and ordered everything for this car, just because of the way I'm finding things. I kind of figured that was going to happen. Sure enough, it did. All right, time to go to the other side. Now, if you've never worked on a Mustang before, particularly these older ones, a couple of unique things that go on here. Your upper control arm is pretty standard. Once you break the ball joints loose, underneath here there's 2 bolts, and then there's 2 nuts on the inside of the fender well. The lower control arm takes a single bolt, and that's going to be a cam bolt. That's where all your adjustment comes in. Standard ball joints, top and bottom here, nothing fancy. But what is different is this strut rod. Now this strut rod goes through the front cross member, has a 1-inch nut on the other side of it. You're going to want to take that off first, because while it's bolted to the control arm, you don't have to worry about it spinning. So first thing to go is going to be the nut for the strut rod, then your sway bar link. Then after that, you can work on getting the tie rod end off, and then the ball joints. So down here, looking at the front of that strut rod, this is what you're up against. Like I said, it's a 1-inch nut on there. You're going to need an impact, or at least a breaker bar, maybe with a cheater bar on it. But it's kind of what holds the control arm from going back, and from front to back. So let's get this zipped off. What I like to use are these extensions with the wobble on the end, because you won't be able to get a straight shot in there, and I don't have a whole lot of luck with universals. So let's see if she goes. Seems to be a little stuck. Alright, so that wasn't terrible. Basically, I heated it up with a map torch. I didn't have to break out the big torch. This car, as I said a couple of times, I believe to be a nice original rust-free Southern car. So honestly, everything is coming apart fairly well. On your car, you may not get so lucky. I've actually had these where I've had to cut the strut rod itself, hammer it out, and then just buy another, a couple of new rods. But it'll happen. Okay, now, after you get that strut rod off, next order of business is going to be to get the caliper off. Now again, Mustang is a little unique, where you have your normal caliper mounting bolts there, and up there someplace. But before you take those off, right there's a shield that goes over the back of the caliper. There's going to be 2, I think they're 3/8 or 7/16 bolts. You need to take those out, otherwise you will never get the caliper off the car. Okay, so that little guard back here, those are actually 2 3/8 bolts. The caliper itself takes a 9/16 socket. And just like any other car, you're going to go ahead and spin them off. Now, I'll show you once this is apart. The bolt threads into the caliper mounting bracket, and then the front of it goes into a rubber bushing right there. That's actually kind of where your semi-floating action is supposed to be. So, I don't know if you could hear it, but you can actually hear the rubber kind of crunching as I'm turning this out. Sorry about that. Really hard to do with one hand. As I'm turning this, I'm also applying an outward force. Because by hand it ain't going to move. Of course, when it goes back together, it'll all get greased. Oh, this is fascinating. Okay, there we go. Alright, so there's your bolt. So as you can see, the threads are up here. This slides through and into this little rubber boot that's here. Now I'll take off the other one. Well, you wrestled out all the bolts. Now, when this comes out, you need some place to put it. You don't want to just let it hang by the brake hose here because it'll break, especially something as original as this is. So, I know somebody either makes or sells these really neat S-hooks. I don't have those. So we're just going to use a couple of wire ties around the brake line here and we'll be fine. You know, it's funny. You know, I always say do your forensics. Find out why something ain't right. So, in this case, you know, it's clear somebody came in here and painted all this. I mean, here's the original rust. But even these little brass tabs, they took the time to paint these. I can only imagine what kind of shape they're actually in. And what's funny is that over here at this fitting, that's all paint. You know, I mean, really, this car seriously is lipstick on a pig. Unfortunately, I have another customer, this one, who is on a budget, so I can't do all the things I want to do to it. But for it up to me, yeah, we'd be putting a brake package on this. But that ain't gonna happen. So let's just press on. Next to come off is gonna be the rotor. Get yourself one of these buckets. These are just dollar store buckets. You know, when you take on a project this big, one of the most important things you need to do is hold on to the hardware. Because a lot of it is very specialized, like this caliper bracket. I'm sorry, caliper bracket, caliper bolt. Now, normally I put the bolts right back in the same holes that they come out of, if it's something that's going to be reused. So those little 3/8 bolts that held on the dust cover for the shield for the caliper, I just threaded those back in the hole. Same thing here. So when you go to take this off, you have a cotter pin that needs to come out, and then there's going to be a little safety nut. It's not a castle nut. I'm not sure what the name of it is. I just call it a safety nut. Sort of like a nut that fits over the actual castle nut. So once you get the cotter pin out, and don't worry about holding on to these. You got to replace them. Then find ourselves a pry driver here. That's a term that was coined by another channel, South Main Auto. So this is that little safety nut. It almost looks like a castle nut, but it's not. And then here is our actual nut that holds everything together. Okay, so once you get that little dust cap out of the way, the cotter pin, the safety nut, you got your big nut here. It's not going to be on tight. You will need a, ratchet adjustables. Then you can slide the rotor off. So let me put you down for a second. And now with the rotor off, there. With the rotor off, we can continue digging into this. So we're going to work on the strut rod, right? So you got two bolts that go through. They take a 3/4 up top, and they're going to take a 3/4 on the bottom, but as you can see, they also have cotter pins in them. So the cotter pins got to go. And with the two nuts underneath for the strut rod out of the way, we're going to come over here and work on this tie rod end. Okay, tie rod end. 3/4 inch wrench, get the cotter pin out of the way. Again, this isn't going to be under a whole lot of pressure. It shouldn't be, it's not 100 foot-pounds tight. It's fighting me, that's for sure. do, because I don't like things swinging down and smacking me in the face or hitting the ground, although this is getting replaced, is I'll leave the nut about that much on, and then we'll work on separating this. Something I forgot to do. The tie rod adjuster here, we got to get that loosened up, and that's a 9/16 head on both sides. I'm a rocket scientist. I thought I was recording, but I wasn't. But I already went and hit the spindle here with the hammer and dropped the tie rod out. So, what do we got left? My finger. Okay, so what do we got left? We got an upper ball joint, lower ball joint, and basically it's wash, rinse, and repeat of everything else that we've done. There's going to be, so here's our tie rod end. Here's part of the boot up here, and that thing is locked up solid. So we made the right call to just go ahead and replace everything. I mean, you can tell when you drive a car, you know, just how effed up it is. This one was one of the worst ones that I've ever driven. So, upper ball joint, same thing. We got a cotter pin. Lower ball joint, we got a cotter pin. We got a couple of nuts. Well, let's get after it. I forgot to mention, if you really want to make life easy on yourself before you do anything else, take off the sway bar end link here. Makes everything come apart so much easier. 9/16 top and bottom. And this is what the sway bar end link looks like taken out of the car. So down on the bottom here, I said 9/16, it's 5/8. This goes through the actual lower control arm. You got a spacer. This goes through the sway bar itself. So again, if it's something that you're going to save, put it in your bucket. And your upper and lower bowl joint nuts are going to be 1 inch. I think it's 1 inch. And again, they're not under a whole lot of pressure. You know, they only get torqued to 60 or 70 foot-pounds. So they actually break free pretty easy. One thing that you want to do is turn the spindle in the direction in which it is that you're going to be taking it off. So we have this going this way. Again, like I said, don't take the nut all the way off. Then, turn the spindle around the other way. And you can come after the upper. That's all it takes to break it loose. Now, that's not on every car. I mean, there are going to be some cars, I've had some cars where I've actually had to cut them off. You know, what are you going to do? I got lucky with this car. Well, the owner got lucky. Not my car. Personally, I would have bought it. I think you got a deal. Okay, so we got that. So now, what we want to do is move the light. There we go. And then we're going to take our smasher. We're going to be striking right here. Alright, we're going to be striking right here. Well, may need a bigger hammer. Okay, so the solution was a bigger hammer. Now, let's see if we get the top one to go any easier. Oh boy. There we go. Guys getting tired yet? I know I am. Alright, so we take that off. We take that off. I'm going to turn this around. And we lift that up. And there you go. There's a spindle on the ground. That guy's pretty sloppy. Of course, the boot's all tore up. Actually, I think we found one good part on the car. Not that it matters. And here comes my second set of hands. So now you got the spindle out of the way. You already took your nut off your strut rod. Now grab, twist, pull it out. What you're going to see is that there's an adjusting nut on here. This adjusting nut they're going to use at the alignment shop. This is what's going to help set the wheel center in the wheel well. Part of the aligner. So don't lose that. Don't lose this. They're very expensive. Toss that aside. Now, you're down to the last two things. You got your lower control arm, which this bushing is all bound up. And then you got your upper control arm, which, if you can, I don't know if you guys can see in there, but that bushing is completely newt. And then, just like I showed you at the beginning, when I had the pry bar on, if I take this, front end parts aren't supposed to make that kind of noise. So, we're going to focus on this upper one, which is a 3/4 socket here, a 3/4 wrench on the inside. And this is where a second set of hands is going to come in, unless you got long orangutan arms, because you have to reach over the fender well or up underneath here to get to the nut, and you will need an impact to get these off. Everything else you can pretty much do by hand. These are going to need an impact for. So now, from one of the most uncomfortable positions you could be in, you can get your arm up here in between the motor, put your other hand over here on your impact gun without smashing you in the face. And now, with the help of your air gun, and that guy is done. Okay, and again, from a most uncomfortable position, it's time to take out the lower control arm. Now, it's on a cam bolt, which means that there is a cam on one side and a cam on the other. That's going to set the distance in and out from the car. Your camper is going to be set through there. So, it's a 3/4 inch on both sides. I got a wrench and impact with an extension on it. There's actually a hole in the frame to put an air tool on it, so use that to your advantage. Don't try to get in there with a wrench and put two wrenches together and then one slips off and you end up hurting yourself. So let's see how much of a fight this is. Well, that was pretty uneventful. So, that's off. Start loosening this guy up. And then you have to find something. I actually just took the wrench before and just turned the bolt until it freed up. And you're going to have to work this out of here. There's no other way of doing it. Lucky, which I don't, but that's what comes with cars. Pry bar in there, pull out that cam bolt. Now, like I showed you, see how it's shaped like an egg? I'll show you from this side. See the bolt's at the bottom, so as you turn it, it'll move that control arm in and out. Now, it's just a matter of wrestling this guy out of here. There's the cam. I'm done with that guy. And the other thing, this is why I tell you to keep track of all your hardware. When you look at the bolt, it has two flats on it here. That coincides with the key on this cam, so that when they go together and they're in the car, they turn the same. You don't have to worry about screwing anything up. And that, my friends, is tearing down the suspension on one of these old Mustangs. It kind of sucks. The worst part of it is doing the coil springs. That's the part that'll kill you. Everything else is just a matter of nuts and bolts and prying and cutting and heating and cursing and more prying and more heating. So I'm going to cut the video off here. I'm going to come back with another video. We're going to try to get things cleaned up in here. I'm going to show you the difference between the new parts and the old parts. And we are pretty much just going with replacement parts, but we're going to be using urethane bushings. It's 2018. There's no reason to use rubber unless you're doing a 100-point restoration. This isn't even a real Mach 1, so really we can do whatever we want. Hope you liked the video. If you did, give us a like. Give us some feedback. Leave a comment. I love reading comments, good, bad, indifferent, whatever. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Catch us over on Facebook. I'm really not doing Instagram anymore, and I gave up on Twitter because it's just nothing but political crap on there, and I've removed myself from all that. So catch us on Facebook, Jersey Shore Fabricators. I think LLC. If not, just put in Jersey Shore Fabricators, and you'll probably see my mug in there someplace. Until we see you next time, be careful. Peace.